Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirtz Hashem today we will be completing Daf Ayin Tes Amid Beis and learning Daf Pei Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Ayin Tes Amid Beis, Siman Shin Aleph Sif Tes Zayin, about halfway down in the Shulchan Aruch on Ayin Tes Amid Beis. I know it looks a little bit scary. Looks like we have a lot of Ayin Tes Amid Beis left, but that piece of today's share should go relatively quickly. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanisudim Batzara Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetziam Yitzara L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira U'Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Fuah Shalema for Rachel Shavo Basitel Freda, Moshe Meir Ben Esther Fradel, Tzvi Melei Miriam Chavadas Bas Rezel Serel Dvara Bas Shosha Bina, Rivka Bas Shira Leah. And our learning should be a schus. The Rabbi Shalom should watch over all of our brothers and sisters that find themselves in harm's way. B'chol makayim shehem. Okay. So here in Siman Shin Aleph, we are continuing on the theme of what are you allowed to go out wearing on Shabbos, what are you not allowed to go out wearing on Shabbos, says the Mechaber Sif Tes Zayin. Kiteya. Now, you know what? Before I read Tes Zayin, just by way of a preface, let's remember what we learned previously in Sif Tes Vav. In Sif Tes Vav, we learned about somebody who Nebuch doesn't have a foot, or perhaps his lower leg has been amputated, and he has a kav. And the Mechaber told us that what this kav is, it's a prosthetic device, but it's a prosthetic device which is only cosmetic. It's not a functional cosmetic device. He doesn't walk on it. It's not used to support the weight of his body. It's only cosmetic so that he should not look like somebody who is missing a leg. The Mechaber told us that since he can't use this for any kind of support, he's not allowed to go out with this on Shabbos. Now, the words of the Mechaber were that since he's not going to support himself with it, since it's only cosmetic, he's not allowed to go out with it. It's not necessary for his walking, and therefore aser. And what the Mishnah Berurah told us is that the problem over here is it might fall off, and he might come to carry it Dalet Amos in Rishos HaRabim. In other words, the thinking is, since he doesn't actually need it to walk, it's not what he uses to walk, he uses his good leg and a crutch to walk, and it's only cosmetic, so if it falls off, he may just carry it, because he could travel without it. Now, what we spoke out is, it's very clear from the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah is learning the Mechaber like Shitas Tosfos. Shitas Tosfos is that really this kav, really this prosthetic device, is considered a minol. It's considered his shoe. And really, midaraisa, he is allowed to go out with it. The reason he can't go out with it is because of a gzera d'Rabbanan. The gzera d'Rabbanan is, we're afraid it might fall off and he might carry it Dalet Amos and Rishos HaRabim. But midaraisa, it's really a minol. And against that backdrop, let's look at Sif Tes Zayin. Says the Mechaber. Kiteya, again, an amputee, or the Gemara, the Rishonim say, this kiteya doesn't necessarily have to be an amputee. It could be somebody whose lower legs and feet have atrophied to the point where they are no longer functional. He can't use them. He can't move them. He can't use them. He can't support his weight with them. So they might be present, but he can't use them. So kiteya she'enu yachal lelech klal al shoikav. This kiteya, he can't use his calves, his lower legs, at all to support his weight. Ella, rather, what he does is, yoshev al kisei. He sits on a very, very low chair. Nebuch, I think people have seen this type of a person. He sits on a very, very low chair. Usually he's strapped to that low chair. Ukishenekar mimikaimai, when he wants to uproot himself from his place and he wants to travel forward, what does he do? Nismach al yodov, he supports his body with his hands. So he's sitting on a very, very low chair, and we're going to see he's holding some kind of wooden clogs in his hands that he pushes down on the ground to elevate himself up, and then he swings forward, and then he rests the chair back down again. So he propels himself by raising himself up using his arms and then lowering himself down. Okay. So ukishenekar mimkaimai nismach al yodov, he leans on his hands. Va'al shoykov. Now, he might be using his lower legs as well. V'nidchaf lefanav, and he pushes himself forward. What I want you to envision is like this. This fellow, maybe he has the lower leg. He has his calves from his knee down, right? Let's imagine that his legs are bent at the knees. So that when he puts his, one second. No, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up two cases. In this case, he can't use his legs. He's sitting on that chair. He pushes himself up using his hands, and that's the way he propels himself forward. So in this case, we said this fellow's lower legs are atrophied. He can't really use them. So they kind of dangle beneath him. They kind of hang. And he makes some kind of leather padding or something to protect the bottom, the stump or the bottom of his legs. When he uses his hands to propel himself forward, nishan gam al raglov ktsas, his lower legs or his feet, they will touch the ground. Ein yotzim behem b'Shabbos, he's not allowed to go out with those leather paddings or whatever it is that he has on the bottom of his calves or on the bottom of his feet. The idea to tluyim, because since his lower legs or his feet, which are atrophied, are just hanging and dangling beneath him, v'loy manchi ara, and typically they're not resting on the ground, zimnin de mishtalfi, sometime the leather pads will fall off. And since he doesn't need them to propel himself, he may come to carry them. But with the clogs that he holds in his hands, that he's allowed to go out with. So that was a mouthful. What the Mechaber is describing over here is, you have a person whose lower legs are completely atrophied. He does not use them to support his body. The way he's propelling himself with his hands. In order to propel himself with his hands, he doesn't just take the palms of his hands and push the palms of his hands down on the ground. He has these like wooden clogs. We call them safsalim, like benches, because if you envision kind of like an upside down bench with a handle, and it's like a wooden clog that he holds in his hands. They're not tied to his hands. He holds them in his hands, and he uses that to push down on the ground and pick himself up. Now, when he does that, when he pushes down on the ground and he picks himself up, his lower legs or his feet, if they are present, they will drag on the floor, and they'll become abraded. So he has these like leather pads for the bottom of his feet, but he doesn't rest his weight on his lower legs or his feet. And therefore, he doesn't need those leather pads in order to travel. He's not counting on them in order to travel, right? Now, again, really, we're going like Shitas Taisvis. We would consider those to be a malbush. We would consider them to be a shoe. The truth is, the way I'm describing it, they're protecting his body. If they're protecting his body, really, they are a minnow. They are a shoe. And we're going like we did in Sif Tezvav. We're going like Shitas Taisvis. We're going to consider these to be a shoe. So really, Midaraisa, he could wear them on Shabbos. The problem is, since he doesn't require them for his hiluch, since he doesn't require these pads to propel himself, because that's not what he's using to propel himself forward, if they fall off, he might come to carry them. And therefore, midrabanan, it's usher for him to go out with them. Now, let's continue the Mechaber before we go to the Mishnah Berurah. Avo. B'kisei v'safsalam haktanim shebiyodov, but with the chair that he's sitting on. Remember, this fellow, Nebuch, is sitting in a chair, right? So with the chair and with those wooden clogs that he's holding in his hands, they're not affixed to his body in any way. With the chair and with the wooden clogs, mutter lotzes, he's allowed to go out with those. to Rishus Harabim. So you hear? The leather pads are somehow affixed to his body. Somehow we're afraid that they might fall off. He might come to carry them. The clogs are not even affixed to his body. These have handles. He holds them. When he wants to use them, he holds them. The chair, he's sitting in a chair. He's allowed to go out with the chair. And he's allowed to go out with those wooden clogs that he holds in his hands. Mutter lotzes. That he's allowed to go out with. Now, let's see the Mishnah Berurah on that. Mishnah Berurah is cutting on Zayin. These are the wooden clogs that he holds in his hands, and he supports himself with them. When he propels himself forward. Vishari, he's allowed to go out to Rishus Harabim carrying these. Why? Because later on in today's Shir Mitzvah Hashem, we will learn Sif Yod Zayin, where we will say that an old man or an ill person who cannot walk without a cane is allowed to go out on Shabbos holding a cane. Why? Because the cane is his shoe. Even though he's not wearing the cane, he's holding the cane in his hand. He's allowed to go out with the cane on Shabbos because for him, the cane becomes a shoe. And we'll talk more about that, Mir Hashem, in Sif Yud Zayin. But what we're saying over here in Sif Tez Zayin is, this amputee, those wooden clogs with handles that he holds, and that he uses to propel himself forward, that's like the cane. That, for him, is considered a shoe. So as far as Midaraisa, it's a shoe. We're going to call it a malbush. We're going to call it a shoe that he's allowed to go out with. Midrabanan, Dilma Mishtalfi, what do you mean? He's allowed to carry it. We're saying Lehedia that he's allowed to carry it. We're not worried about him carrying it, Dalet Amos in Rishus Harabim, because he's allowed to. Because for him, it's considered a shoe. Now let's go a little bit weiter over here. 4 lines from the bottom, middle of the line. Another case with an amputee. Kitera b'shtei raglov, somebody Nebuch who has both feet amputated. U'mahalech al shoikav v'al arkubaysav. This is the case that I started describing before, and then I realized I was describing the wrong case. Somebody whose feet, Nebuch, he's missing both feet. Now I want you to imagine, he has his lower legs, he has his calves. So imagine that his lower legs are bent at the knee. And the way he travels is, he puts his calves, the underside, which is really the front of his calves, that's what rests on the ground. And that's how he propels himself. He propels himself on his calves and his knees, right? Because he's kneeling, essentially, on the ground. So the front of his calves are in contact with the ground. So kitei b'shtei raglov, somebody who Nebuch is missing both feet, u'mahalech al shoikav al arkubaysav, and he travels on his knees. Now, if he travels on his knees, that means his knees are in contact with the ground, and the front of his calves are in contact with the ground. And he makes leather pads for the front of his calves, because that's what's in contact with the ground constantly. He's allowed to go out with those pads on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, over here, we're not afraid that they're going to fall off and he's going to come to carry them Dalet Amos in Rishus Harabim. In the first case of Sif Tez Zayin, where the person with the atrophied legs, his legs are just hanging, we're afraid they might fall off. He doesn't use them to travel, so he might come to carry them. Over here, his calves are in contact with the ground all the time, and that's the way he propels himself. He travels on his knees and on his calves. In that case, the lower leg, those paddings that are on his calves are mamish his shoes, and they're not gonna fall off and he'll come to carry them. He needs them in order to travel. So in that case, it's mutter midaraisa and it's mutter midarabanan. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah. Haga. Similarly, based on everything that we've been seeing, v'chein mutter lotzes b'minol shel eitz. A regular person is allowed to go out wearing a wooden shoe, a wooden clog. Shaharegel nichnas boy. It's actually formed like a shoe, so that the foot actually goes into it. And we don't have to be concerned that this wooden clog might fall off and he might come to carry it Dalet Amos in Rishus Harabim. Now, there's more than one chiddush over here. We need to see the Mishnah Berurah and the Biur Halacha. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Nun Tes. The Mishnah Berurah says, shel eitz. You're allowed to go out with this wooden clog. Hainu, afal gav she'en by or klal, even though it doesn't have any leather on it at all. Afilu hachi mikri minal, still in all, it is called a shoe. What's the novelty over here? The chiddush over here is that the mechaber is again paskening like shitas Tosfos. We have a machlokes rishonim, a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, in what is considered a shoe. Rashi seems to suggest that in order for something to be called a shoe, benegeya in the context of Hilchos Shabbos, it has to have leather. Shoe equals leather. If it's not leather, it's not a shoe. Tosfos says, no. In the context of Hilchos Shabbos, a shoe is anything that's a shoe. Anything that you wear like a shoe and it serves the purpose of a shoe is a shoe. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if it looks like a shoe, it's formed like a shoe, you wear it like a shoe, it serves the purpose of a shoe, it's a shoe. Says the Mechaber, a wooden clog, yes, you could go out with it on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even though it doesn't have leather. Why? Because we paskin like Tosfos. Says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Having said that, v'ayin be'biur agra, the Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the biur agra, ubi pri megadim, and in the pri megadim. Shehikshu who ask a kasha on this. Mehod elakaman simin tef reish yud dalet sif beis. From something that we learned in Hilchos Yom Kippurim. The mashma dedafka b'mechupa ar milamala. Over there, in the context of the halachas of Yom Kippur, when you're not allowed to wear a shoe, we said a shoe is only usher to be worn on Yom Kippur if it at least has leather on the uppers. But it has to have leather. Without leather, it's not a shoe, and you're allowed to wear it. Aval shel eitz lavad, but a shoe that's only wood, loy chashav minal, is not considered a shoe in the context of Hilchos Yom Kippurim, and you're allowed to wear it on Yom Kippur. So this seems to be a kasha. In Hilchos Yom Kippurim, we're saying in order to be a shoe and be usher, it has to have leather. Over here, the Mechaber is saying, in the context of Hilchos Shabbos, it doesn't have to have leather. Even if it's not leather, it's considered a shoe. V'ayin sham be'biur agra ma'shetiritz pazel yashiv das Shulchan Aruch. They where the lechalik ben Shabbos liyom Kippurim. The Gra says you can make a very simple chilik between Hilchos Shabbos and Hilchos Yom Kippurim, and that is that on Hilchos Yom Kippurim, what is it also to wear? There's a din minal. It has to have a din of a shoe. There's a din. There's a rule. The rule is leather equals shoe. So on Yom Kippur, if it doesn't have leather, you're allowed to wear it. On Shabbos, it's not a pshat that on Shabbos there's a din minal. No, on Shabbos there's a din malbush. On Shabbos you're allowed to wear malbushim. A shoe is a type of malbush. We're not concerned, you see, Yom Kippur we're concerned, there's a special halacha on Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to wear a shoe. Okay, what's a shoe? A shoe is leather. So if it's wood and no leather, it's not a shoe. So you're allowed to wear it. On Shabbos it's not a vorit in a din minal. It's not a halacha of a shoe. It's a halacha of malbushim. On Shabbos, you're allowed to go out wearing garments. One type of garment is a shoe. What makes a shoe a garment? If it serves the purpose of a shoe. Like I said, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If it serves the purpose of a shoe and it's made like a shoe and you wear it like a shoe, then it's a shoe. And then in the context of Hilchos Shabbos, you're allowed to go out with it. Aval, however, having said that, still in all, the Gra seems to lean towards the opinion of the Ramban, that in the context of Hilchos Shabbos, if it's only wood, the Gra seems to take the side of the Ramban that a taka wouldn't be a shoe. Okay, so what we've seen over here so far, the Ramah gives us this halacha, and he told us, you're allowed to go out in a wooden shoe, shaharegal nichnas pa, that the foot goes into. Says the Mishnah Berurah, chiddush number 1 over here is that you're allowed to go out with this type of shoe, this wooden shoe, even though it has no leather. Even though it has no leather, it's still considered a shoe l'inyan Hilchos Shabbos, and you're allowed to go out with it. But the Ramah said another thing. The Ramah said it has to be a shoe that your foot goes into. Says the Biur Halacha, Dibra Maskal Sharegel Nichdas Bay. With Sainer Loimar, what the Ramah wants to say over here is, Afal Gav de Gemara, even though the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos Samach Vav Amin Aleph, Mashma implies, the Bishal Eitz Gazrina Nedilma Mishtamit Miragloi. The Gemara seems to suggest that you're not allowed to go out in a wooden shoe, because a wooden shoe, wood doesn't mold to the shape of your foot. Leather is soft, it's pliable. As you wear it, it molds to the shape of your foot, and therefore leather stays on your foot. Wood is wood. Whatever shape it is, that's what shape it is. It doesn't hold your foot. And therefore the Gemara suggests you're not allowed to go out with a wooden shoe. Why? Because we're afraid Dilma Mishtamit Miragla. It might fall off your foot, and then guess what? You might come to carry it to Aladamas and Rishos Harabim. So how do we reconcile the Gemara with the Ramah? Mipnei she'ena mahudak. Again, the Gemara says you can't do this because it doesn't hold your foot. Says the Bir Halacha, you have to understand. Hainu bizmanom. That was true in the time of the Gemara. What was different? The type of shoe that the Gemara was talking about was really just a platform that your foot sat on. And then there were straps that wrapped around your calf that tied this leather. We're calling it a shoe. But it was more, if you can imagine, just the bottom of a shoe. It didn't have sides at the top. It wasn't shaharegel nichnas ba. It wasn't that your foot went into it. So it was more almost like a wooden platform that was tied to your foot because it was tied around your calf. So that, the Gemara says, you can't go out with, because that was likely to fall off. Masha Einkein b'shalanu, this is in contrast to ours, which, like the Ramah says, it's shaped like a shoe. Your foot actually goes into it, and therefore, we're not afraid that it will fall off. So those are the two chidushim of the Ramah. Let's go weiter here in the Ramah, second line from the bottom, beginning of the line, here in Ayin Tesam and Beis. Actually, those three words go together with the previous line. That's the Ramah said, you're allowed to go out in a wooden shoe that your foot goes into, because we're not concerned that it's going to fall off. Again, even though it has no leather, it's okay. And since your foot actually goes into it and it's formed like a shoe, we're not afraid it's going to fall off. Continues the Ramah. Similarly, bepantenish, you're allowed to go out with slippers, even though they come off very easily. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. You're allowed to go out with slippers. Even though slippers literally slip on and slip off very easily. Hainu, explains the Mishnah Berurah, al yedei chalitza biyadayim, you could just slip them off with your hand. Ubaloya teras kesher, the slipper is a slip-on. It's a slip-on, slip-off. There are no laces, there are no straps, there's no tying involved. So you just slip it off your foot very, very easily. Nevertheless, since these slippers incorporated leather, they molded to your foot, and therefore there was no concern that they were going to fall off. And there was no need to be concerned that it might fall off and you might come to carry it in Rishos Harabim. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, continues the Ramah. Having said that, on the bottom line, the yesh machmirim v'isrim. However, there are those that are machmir and say you cannot go out with these kind of slippers. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut in Samach Aleph, the yesh machmirim hainu bepantenish. There are those that are machmir on these slippers, umitam dilma mishtalef, because the taka are afraid that they might fall off and you might come to carry them. The Taz later on in Sif Mem Kosav says that we're not concerned about this. Why? You know why? Because nowadays nobody walks around barefoot in Rishos Harabim. And this is very pertinent to us nowadays. You want to know, could you go outside on Shabbos wearing Crocs? Crocs could slip on and off very easily. But like the Taz says, nobody walks barefoot in Rishos Harabim. If you're walking in Rishos Harabim on Shabbos and your Croc falls off, you're not going to walk barefoot and carry it to Alanamas in Rishos Harabim. The Tosefes Shabbos does take issue with this Taz. And it would seem the b'makam refesh b'vadei in lahakel. The Mishnah Berurah says in muddy areas you should not be makel, like the Taz. Now, at first glance, this takes you a little bit by surprise. When I first saw this, I almost read it wrong. I thought he was saying, yeah, in muddy places, Yuzicha could be makel like the Taz. Because I thought to myself, in muddy places, certainly nobody's walking barefoot. But that's not what he says. He says, V'nira de mamakom refesh bevade ein lohakil. In a muddy place, you cannot be makel like the Taz. In a muddy place, you can't wear slippers that can come off easily. Why? Because the mud will pull your slipper off, right? You got stuck in the mud. We don't know, Baruch Hashem, we usually don't know what it means really so much to walk in serious mud. I once lived in a house that was brand new construction, and when we moved in, they had not put down any grass yet. Everything around the house was mud. I'm talking serious mud, construction site level mud. That mud, when it rains and you step in it, you sink in. And when you try to pull your foot out, your shoe comes off. Forget your slipper. You get literally stuck in the mud. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying. In a place where it's muddy and the mud will pull your slipper off, your zicha should not be makel like the Taz. However, continues the Mishnah Berurah, L'kulei alma, everybody would agree. Let's say you went out with slippers into Rosh Hashanah. You forgot this whole deal. The Taz, not like the Taz. Ain't tzarich la'asiran. You definitely don't have to take your slippers off and leave them in Rosh Hashanah because you're afraid that you can't wear them. Go home with the slippers. It'll be making like the Taz. V'chein adin, very important line here. V'chein adin b'kol hani she'asurin mishum asi da'asi la'asuye. Says the Mishnah Berurah, any of the things that we have learned, that there's an Issa D'Rabbanan to wear them outside on Shabbos because of the fear that they might fall off and you might come to carry them. If you went outside with them into Rosh Hashanah, you're allowed to wear them until you come back home. By the way, I just will point out, based on the halachas that we've learned here in Ayin Tesam Beis, Rav Moshe in the Igris says something that's negayah to, unfortunately, to a lot of people. And that is, we see that the kiteya, we see that the amputee is allowed to go out with that chair, with that low chair of his. And he's allowed to go out with those wooden clogs that he pushes himself forward with. Says Rav Moshe, nowadays, a kiteya is allowed to go out. Somebody who's a real cripple, Nebuch, who really can't walk, he's allowed to go out in a wheelchair and propel himself in the wheelchair. Somebody else is not allowed to push him. But he could propel himself in the wheelchair, the same way as we have the halacha here in Sif Tezayin. Continues the Ramah, bottom line, middle of the line. V'lo yelech adam yachif b'Shabbos. As a general rule, somebody should not go outside barefoot on Shabbos, b'makom she'ein derech leilech yachif, in places where it's not the derech to go out barefoot. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah Samach Beis, Ubedake Moshe Mashma, from the Ramah on the Torah, the Dake Moshe, it is implied that even in places where it is normal to go outside barefoot during the week, on Shabbos, you don't go out barefoot. On Shabbos, you make sure you wear shoes. Why? So that you should remember that it's Shabbos. It should be a constant reminder to you that it's Shabbos. The Bach suggests that it's also an Indian of Einik Shabbos. You're right. Maybe on Monday you go outside barefoot. Shabbos, Einik Shabbos, you make sure to wear shoes. This would apply equally to Yom Tov because the Indian of Einik Yom Tov is the same as the Indian of Einik Shabbos. Vayin Siman Beis Sivav. The Mishnah Berurah sends us all the way back to the beginning of Chelek Aleph. Take a look at Siman Beis. The Gam B'chol Midas Tzniusu Shaloi Leilech Yachef. It is considered proper tznius, proper modesty, not to go outside barefoot. Okay, we have a little bit left here in the Shulchan Aruch, in the words of the Ramah, to Sif Tezayin. Top line: V'lo yetze adam b'Shabbos k'mo shu yetze b'chol. Just b'derech klal. A person should not go outside on Shabbos dressed in the same manner and in the same way as he does during the week. Bilti davar acher sheyizkar yodai shu Shabbos. Person should always go out with something that reminds him that it's Shabbos. So this is actually a very important gedank. It's a very important Ramah that people don't pay attention to. Let's say you're a businessman and you wear a suit all week. right? But you come home, you take your tie off. On Shabbos, don't go out without a tie. Have something different about you. On Shabbos, wear your jacket. Or on Shabbos, wear your hat when you go out. But go out in some way on Shabbos, dress differently than you do during the week. Why? So that you should have a constant reminder. Sheyiskar Yada Yishu Shabbos. So that you should remember that it's Shabbos. And you shouldn't come chas v'shalom to be Michal Shabbos. So people, sometimes, in certain communities, people they'll come home Shabbos after the Suda, they change it to weekday clothing, and then they walk out the same way they do it during the week. No, it's Shabbos, it's not Tuesday. Don't go out on Shabbos the same way you go out during the week. Make it different in some way. Make sure that you're wearing something different so it should serve as a constant reminder that it is Shabbos. Says the Mechaber Vayter Sif Yud Zayin. Chiger, a lame person, a cripple, she'eni yochel leilech b'lo makel, who cannot walk without a stick. Okay? He cannot walk without a cane. Chiger she'eni yochel leilech b'lo makel, motor leilech by afilu eina kosher by. He's allowed to go out with a cane on Shabbos, even though it's not tied to his personage in any way. He's literally carrying it in his hand. If he cannot walk without a cane, he's allowed to carry his cane. But if he's able to walk without a cane, and he only uses the cane to give himself extra support. But could he walk without a cane? Yes, he could walk without a cane. But if he could walk without a cane, usher, then he's not allowed to go out with the cane. The says the Ramah, somebody who's not necessarily lame, he's just an ill person who is now on the road to recovery, so he's very weak. The he has the same din as a lame person. In other words, what the Ramah seems to be adding is, he's saying this is not a halacha that is specific to somebody who has something wrong with his leg or wrong with his legs. No, it could be somebody who's getting over a terrible bout of COVID and flu and pneumonia, and he was in bed for a long, lengthy period, and now he's convalescing and he's very, very weak. He has the same din as a chiger. If he cannot walk without a stick, he's allowed to go out with a cane on Shabbos. If he can walk without a cane, but he just wants it for extra support, then he's not allowed to use the cane on Shabbos outside. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Samach Gimel, B'loi Makel. If he can't walk without a cane, mutter, then he's allowed to go out with a cane on Shabbos. Why? A bomb of a Mishnah Berurah. The kevan de eina yochel leilech b'loi makel, because since he cannot go out without a cane, have a lake him min all the day. Guess what? The cane is his shoe. Now, the Chavetz Chaim did not make this up. If you take a look at Sharet Zion, Ois Katan Samach Rosh, Beitza, Chaf Hey, Per Gimel, Sif Hey. Siman Hey. There's a Rosh. It's a Beferish Rosh. The Rosh says, somebody who cannot walk without a cane, the cane is his shoe. So it's very interesting. It's fascinating. And we're going to have to see where this goes, how it's going to apply, if it applies to other shilas in other areas. Over here, you have somebody who's literally carrying something in his hand. It's not attached to his body in any way. It's not resting on his body in any way. He's holding it in his hand. It's a malbush. It's a minol. Because he needs it to walk. He can't walk without it. And therefore, it is bottled to his guf the same way a minol is bottled to his guf. Since he absolutely requires it to serve his body, for his ability to walk, it becomes his shoe. But this is only if he can't go without it. And this is what we saw in Sif Tez Zayin as well, with the amputee who has to hold those wooden clogs. Those wooden clogs become his shoes, even though he's holding them, and they're not on his body or affixed to his body in any way. But if it's possible for him to walk without them, then he's not allowed to go with them outside on Shabbos with the cane. If he could walk without a cane, right? He's not comfortable walking without a cane. He uses the cane for extra support. He uses the cane to steady himself. But he could walk without a cane? If he could walk without a cane, he's not allowed to take the cane in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'chein, similarly, Zokein, an elderly person, Ha'hoilich bebeisai b'loi makil. There are elderly people who in the house, they don't use a cane. But when they go outside, when they go outside, they use a cane because they're weak. But in the house, they don't use a cane. So that means that they could walk without a cane, right? Outside, they're uncomfortable without the cane. But inside, they go without a cane. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that means that when they go outside, they're only taking it to give themselves extra support. Even if this person trembles, this person shakes. So he's an elderly person with the shakes and everything else. But in the house, he goes without a cane? Also, he's not allowed to use the cane outside. Since this person could walk inside without a cane, he's old, he's weak, he's trembling. But since he could walk inside the house without a cane, he's not allowed to go outside with the cane. Because that's called that he doesn't really need the cane, and therefore the cane is now categorized as a masui, as a burden that you're not allowed to carry outside, as opposed to it being categorized as a malbush, as a shoe that you're allowed to go out with. Aval, however, in his skin kolkach, if somebody is so old, he can't go at all without a cane. He uses the cane all the time, even in the house. Then mutter, then yes, then he's allowed to go out with a cane. What the Mechaber said was, if he only takes the cane to give himself extra support. Very interesting Mishnah Berurah, this Mishnah Berurah here. Let's say somebody's walking in a place, a healthy person, but he's walking in a place where he's afraid he might fall. Maybe he has to walk down a hill and it rained and it's slippery, right? So he wants to take a stick in order to support himself so that he shouldn't slip. Or it's during the winter and he's going on the ice. Tell me about it. It's during the winter and he's going on the ice and he wants to hold a stick in order to steady himself so it should be safe and he shouldn't slip on the ice. But remember, this is a healthy person. He's afraid that he might fall. And therefore he wants to take a stick to go out on the ice. The Taz says that you would be allowed to take a stick. A perfectly healthy 30-year-old would be allowed to go out with a stick on Shabbos, on the ice, to steady himself on the ice in Rosh Hashanah, because he has the halacha of a chiger. You're walking on the ice, you have the halacha of a lame person. And if you feel that you cannot go on the ice without a stick, so then you're like a lame person who can't go without a stick. And the Taz says, in that case, you're allowed to take a stick. The El Yerabah Kasav Love the Ein Dvar Muchrachim. The El Yerabah says, no. Person who's afraid that he might slip doesn't get the din of a chiger who cannot walk without a stick. Additional achrayim, says the Mishnah Berurah, that also dispute this Taz. They say like the El Yerabah, and they say no, you're not allowed to go out without an Erev, with a stick on the ice, or with a stick on unlevel ground where you're afraid that you might fall. It would seem that the Mishnah Berurah is being machriya, like these other achrayim, against the Taz. Perhaps he mentions the Taz so that there's room to be makel in very, very extenuating circumstances. If it's negeya, ask your LOR. Okay, now, there is an interesting thing that I want to point out from this last phrase in the Mishnah Berurah, which is going to come up even more so in the next Mishnah Berurah. And that is that the Mishnah Berurah says, the Taz is makel. The Taz is makel. He says, you're worried you're going to slip on the ice, you can go out with a stick. The El Yerabah, other achrayim, they take great issue with the Taz, and they don't like this Taz. And they say, no, you can't go out with a stick just because you're afraid that you might fall. Rak b'makom sheyesh erev. But in a makom where there's an erev, then you can. Sounds from the Mishnah Berurah like you need a heter to do this where there's an erev. In other words, I think 99.9% of us would have reacted and said, well, if there's an Erev, I don't need a heter. It sounds like you're telling me I could rely on the Taz with as a heter. So I'm just picking a Jewish community that's hilly and country-like and everything off the top of my head. Monsey. I live in Monsey, and there's a good Erev. I'm not posketing on the Monsey and Erev. The Erev in Monsey, I don't know anything about the Erev in Monsey. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's no good. I'm saying I don't know. I'm not interested in getting into this. Don't quote Rabbi Weiss. I don't know anything about the Erev in Monsey. I'm just using a mushal lamad over daima. Somebody turns around and says, I live in Monsey. There's a good Erev. It's icy outside. I want to go out with a stick because I'm afraid I might fall. What, I need a heter? I need to come on to the Taz? The Taz says that you're allowed to go out to Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos without an Erev carrying a stick. I understand. If I want to go outside of the Erev with a stick because I'm afraid I might slip on the ice, I understand I need to come on to the Taz. But if I have an Erev, I have to come on to the Taz? Sounds from the Mishnah Berurah like, yeah, you have to come on to the Taz. She'ein lahater bazeh, you shouldn't be mater this, rak b'makom sheyesh Erev. You should only be mater it with is an Erev. Okay, I'm just pointing out that that's what the Mishnah Berurah seems to say. Now let's see the next Mishnah Berurah. Says the next Mishnah Berurah, Osir. What was Osir? The Mechaber said, a lame person who could walk in the house without a stick, he could really walk outside without a stick. He just uses the stick to give himself extra support. Osir, he's not allowed to go out with it on Shabbos because he doesn't really need it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Afilu hu makel tiferes, even if it's a grand, stately, rebisha walking stick, shenosai lekavod, the type of staff or walking stick that was carried even by healthy people as a sign of dignity and cheshivus. I go with a staff. I go with a walking stick. Right? And they would really want to show that it's for Tiferes. They wouldn't put it on the ground. They would hold it up. It's not pshat that I needed to walk with. No, this is a mark of chashivas, this walking stick. So says the Mishnah Berurah, we're saying a person who doesn't really need a stick is not allowed to go out with a stick on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's true even if it's a beautiful chosh of a walking stick with a nice silver top. The avshu tachshit, even though you could make a very good argument, you could say that walking stick is a tachshit. We're not going to give it the category of a malbush. Since he could walk without it, it doesn't become a minol. The person who can't walk without a cane, the cane is his minol. It's his shoe. This guy could walk without a cane. So fine, so it's not his minol. All right, it's not a shoe. It's not a malbush. But it's a tachshit, right? It's carried for fanciness. It's carried to... Look, me. I'm an official. I have a walking stick, so it's a tachshit. So aren't you allowed to go out with a tachshit on Shabbos? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Lo yuhutar lisa tachshit biyadai. We were never matir holding a tachshit in your hand. We were matir wearing a tachshit. Now it's interesting. We were matir carrying a malbush. In other words, if we called a stick a minol, if we called a cane a shoe, because you can't go without it, so we call it a shoe, and you're allowed to carry it in your hand. But we don't find that, says the Mishnah Berurah, by a tachshit. We don't find a case where you're allowed to carry something in Rosh Hashanah in your hand because it has the status of a tachshit. So you want to go with a fancy walking stick, holding it in your hand because it's a tachshit? No, that you can't do. And this seems to be based on a Magen Avram. And the Magen Avram also makes another very interesting, compelling argument that's negeh specifically to this case. In other words, I want to break apart two cases. One shaila would be, I'm a perfectly healthy 30-year-old, but I'm an Adam Choshev. So I want to go out with a beautiful walking stick with a silver thing on top. Nowadays, this is not the derech. But back in the day, there was a derech that a Choshev person went out with a stick, even if he was young and healthy. So I'm a young, healthy guy. I want to go out with a stick for cheshivas, for a tachshit. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, we're not matir holding a tachshit in your hand. We're matir wearing a tachshit. We're not matir holding a tachshit. I'm just pointing out that there's an interesting chiluk. We are matir carrying a malbush, but we're not matir carrying a tachshit. We'll have to see if there's something to that or not to that chiluk. But that is another case. The other case is not a perfectly healthy 30-year-old. An old man who wants to go outside with a cane. Now, really, he could walk without the cane. So we saw that if you really could walk without the cane, then you're not allowed to go out with the cane. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's true even if it's a chosh of a walking stick. That's different than the first case. The case of the healthy 30-year-old, you only want to be matir it because it's a takshit. Can't do that. In the second case, we have two reasons to be matir it. One is it's a takshit. The second one is it does help him walk. You're right. Technically, he could walk without it, but he is an old man, an unsteady guy who has the shakes. So there's two reasons to be matir it. Says the Magen Avram, that actually makes it worse. You know why? Because remember what we learned earlier when we were talking about the Shabbos keys. We learned that if you have something that's dual purpose, right? It has one facet which is it's functional. It's a key. We have another facet that it's a takshit. So we said that there's an opinion in the Mishnah, in the Mechaber, right? It was the day of Rishayna. The day of Rishayna in Sif Yod Aleph, on Ayin Chesam and Beis, said a multifaceted item, something which has functionality, it's a key. It's also a takshit. It's a silver key. It's a beautiful key. You're not allowed to go out with it. Why? So he said because midaraisa, it has a din of a takshit. So midaraisa, you can go out with it. But midarabanan, you can't because of marasayan. What's the marasayan? Somebody will think that you're only going out with it for the functionality. You're not wearing it as a takshit. The halacha is, if you're wearing it as a takshit, you're allowed to go out with it. But if you're wearing it because you need the functionality and you want to transport it outside, then the Mishnah Berurah said you're not allowed to wear it, even midaraisa. So somebody who sees you walking in the street with the silver key, he's going to say, oh, you're wearing it for the functionality. And he's going to think that you're being over a daraisa. You might be really, no, it's a pretty brooch. I put it on because I thought it was a beautiful pin. So you are doing something which is mutter midaraisa. If you're really doing it to transport the key, that's also midaraisa. But you're saying, no, I did it because it's a really pretty pin. That's why I did it. But the onlooker doesn't know that. Says the Magen Avram, the same thing applies over here. If you go outside with a beautiful cane, a beautiful chosh of a walking stick, it's very nice that you want to make an argument that it's a takshit. But if you're an old man who has the shakes, somebody, or even a young fellow, somebody might look at you and say, oh, I guess that guy needs a cane on Shabbos. He's going out with a cane, but he doesn't look like he so much needs a cane, so he's going out with a cane just because he needs a little extra support. In that case, he's transporting a takshit for its functionality. You're not allowed to do that. So there would be a marasayan component. Just very interesting how all of these different things tie together. Okay, I want to go a little bit further. Let's just finish off over here. Let's do Ois Kat and Samach Vav in the Mishnah Berurah. So we started it. Okay. Therefore, this that you see that choshev people taka go out with a stick, asurim lotzeis bahem b'Shabbos chutz la'erev. Again, chutz la'erev. They're not allowed to go out with it out of the erev because they're carrying a takshit, which you're not allowed to do. Aval toicha erev, but inside the erev, mutter, it's mutter im noisoi lekavod if they're carrying a taka as a takshit, oy sheyesh by tzarich ktsas, or he's like a person who needs a little extra support. Ava b'loy tzarich, but if there's no need for this cane at all, it's not, you're carrying it for kavod. You're not a choshev guy. And you don't need any extra support. Ava b'loy tzarich klal, then you're not allowed to carry it inside the erev. You hear this? You hear this? Inside the erev, you're not allowed to carry it. Everybody's looking, what? I thought inside the erev I can do whatever I want. No. Inside the erev you can't do whatever you want. You know why? Because ikazilusa de Shabbos. Because this would be a disgrace to Shabbos. So says the Magen Avram. What's pshat over here? So pshat over here seems to be, this is an inyan of uvda dechol. This is an inyan of making Shabbos like the weekday. When you go out with a stick on Shabbos, this is not a halach in hoitzah. As far as hoitzah, there's an erev. As far as hoitzah, you want to carry a stick, carry a stick. The problem over here is not a shiloh of hoitzah. The shaila over here is uvda de chayil. The shaila over here is zilusa de Shabbos. You go out with a stick. It looks like you're going on a journey. It looks like you're going traveling. Even a healthy person would sometimes go out with a stick if he's going on a journey. We don't know from that because we get in a car when we go on a journey, right? But the truth is that that's an apt comparison. There are things that are usher that would be mutter, but they're only usher because of uvda de chayil. You're not allowed to ride a bike on Shabbos. Why are you not allowed to ride a bike on Shabbos? What's wrong with riding a bike? You have an Erev, right? What's wrong with riding a bike? Which one of the Lamites Malachas is riding a bike? Right? So how come you're not allowed to ride a bike on Shabbos? The reason you're not allowed to ride a bike on Shabbos is because people would ride a bike to work. Right? There are people who ride bikes to work. They live very close by. The office is a hop, skip, and jump. They ride a bike to work. Right? Congestion pricing. I don't want to take my car into the city. I'll park my car outside the congestion pricing, pull out the bike from the back of the car, ride my bike another 4 blocks to my office. So there are people who ride bikes to work. Therefore, you're not allowed to ride a bike on Shabbos because it's uvda de chayil. Take a stick, you're not allowed to go with a stick because going with a stick is uvda de chayil. Okay, I want to push on a little bit further over here. Ois katan samach zayin, dinoi kechiger. The Ramah said somebody who's convalescing, an ill person who is convalescing, he's on the road to recovery, but he's still very weak. He gets the same exact halacha as a lame person. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. What does that mean? Hainu de toli gam kenim yachal elech b'li makal. If he could go without a stick, then he's not allowed to go with a stick. If he can't go without a stick, he could go with a stick. Says the Mechaber, Sif Yud Ches, 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, Suma, a blind person, also loylotes b'makel, he cannot go out with a stick. So you see the blind person with the rod. A blind person cannot go out with a stick on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Samach, also loylotes side chutz le'erev. He can't go outside of the Erev. He can't go with Rishus Harabim holding the stick. Vatam, the reason for this is the etzam halichasai efshel leilech b'li makel. He doesn't need the stick to walk. A blind person has nothing wrong with his legs. There's nothing wrong with his body. He could walk. So he doesn't need the stick to walk. The only thing he has the stick for is to make sure he walks in the right way. We can't elevate the stick to a shoe. How do we elevate a cane to a shoe? How do we make a cane into a malbush? Because your body needs the cane in order to walk. The same way your body needs a shoe in order to walk. So the cane becomes your shoe. The blind person, we can't elevate his rod to a malbush. There's nothing wrong with his body. He could walk fine. The problem is with his senses. He doesn't know where to walk, right? You can't go out with Waze, right? So you can't use the rod because the rod is not going to become a malbush. A little bit further, says the Mechaber, Sif Yotes, Mi Shehu Osir. Fascinating. Somebody who is bound. Kivolim. Pirish, what are kivolim? Handcuffs. But not handcuffs. These are the ones that go on the feet. I forgot what they're called. The word is escaping me right now. What the ones that go on the feet are called. What? Manacles? Say it again? Mantles? Manacles. Okay? I'm getting from the background over here. That's the word that I was looking for. Manacles. Those are the cuffs that go on your legs, right? There's one bracelet kind of that goes on one ankle, another one on the other ankle, and a chain in between so you could only hobble and you can't run away. So Mishu also is somebody who's bound, who kvolim, pirish ke'en tabois, rings, gedolim, big large rings, shesoigrim behem araglayim, that they bind the feet together, baraglov. Mutuloses bahem. Nebuch, if you're in such a situation, you're allowed to go out with these on Shabbos, says the Mishnah Berurah, the next of like my malbush. Unfortunately for this guy, this is a malbush. The derech halichasai hu kain, because that's the only way he could walk. Ubetelim him legabi aguf shu lavish behen. They become bottled to his guf. We definitely don't have to worry that they're going to fall off. He's going to come to carry them. The cops put them on with a key. That's what they're there for. They're there to make sure that they don't fall off. So they're a malbush. They're stuck to him. That's the only way he could walk. Okay, and we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Hashem with Sefchaf. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah, discussing Limud HaTorah, Shivim Megan Agam Skal Yisrael. To Rosh Hashem Shesen Yeshua Sefruas Panas and Shaduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS Tzedek. B'mherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.